Libby Creek runs quietly through the Kootenai National Forest in northwest Montana, about 30 minutes south of the sleepy town of Libby. It's popular among locals for its recreational gold panning, but far enough off the beaten path that it doesn't draw too many tourists. My boyfriend Ryan and I weren't locals. We'd driven across the border from Idaho on a spontaneous summer road trip, planning to hike, explore, and maybe pick up gold panning as a fun, laid-back hobby. We arrived at Libby Creek around 7 in the evening on July 3rd. The area was peaceful, almost deserted. Parking our Subaru in a pullout near the first bridge on Libby Creek Road, we stretched our legs and breathed in the pine-scented air. The creek was clear, trickling gently between gravel bars shaded by thick stands of trees. The evening sun was still strong, but the air felt fresh and inviting. We hadn't been there 5 minutes before we met another vehicle pulling in. A weathered but well-kept pickup truck. A friendly-looking man in his 40s stepped out, accompanied by his son, who couldn't have been older than 11. They introduced themselves. Jason was the father's name, and he seemed genuinely excited to find newcomers interested in gold panning. After chatting briefly, Jason offered to show us a better spot downstream. "I have a small claim down this way," he explained, nodding toward a narrow dirt path that followed the creek. "The gravel there hasn't been picked over as much." Ryan and I gladly accepted the offer, grabbing our gear and following the father and son down the shaded trail. It wasn't far, just a 10-minute walk, but soon enough, we emerged onto a secluded gravel bar. We spent the next couple of hours there, Jason patiently demonstrating how to pan for gold, the boy showing off tiny flecks he'd found. The evening air felt comfortable, and the soft chatter of the creek was relaxing. It was sometime after 8 when I asked, half jokingly, "Do you guys ever find anything weird out here besides gold?" Jason's smile faded slightly. He exchanged a quick look with his son before answering. "Actually, yes. Last fall, just down the creek from here, we stumbled on something pretty unsettling." "Yeah," the boy jumped in, his eyes serious and bright. "It was a human arm." I waited for them to laugh, to break the tension, but they didn't. Ryan's smile dropped away, and I felt an involuntary shiver move down my spine. Jason continued cautiously, his voice low and measured. "We reported it, of course, but nothing ever came of it. Folks go missing out here pretty often. Sometimes they wander off trail, sometimes they get lost, but honestly, a lot of them just vanish." He glanced around, taking in the encroaching shadows. "There are a lot of people who live off-grid in these forests, and not all of them want to be found. After those wildfires a few years back, the government said there might be more than 10,000 folks living out here. No papers, no trails. You gotta be careful." I glanced over at Ryan, silently communicating my discomfort, but neither of us said anything. Jason wasn't trying to scare us, I realized. He was genuinely concerned. Still, the warm evening had taken on a subtle chill. Around 8:30, I stood up and stretched, deciding to grab my sweatshirt from the car before it got darker. Leaving the guys by the creek, I hiked the short trail back up to the road alone. I felt strangely vulnerable walking by myself, suddenly aware of how quiet the forest had become. As I reached our car, movement caught my eye. A dark gray truck passed slowly, dogs barking from inside the cab. I couldn't see the driver clearly, and I didn't think much about it then. Vehicles were allowed on this road after all. But the slow speed and the lack of a friendly wave felt odd. I grabbed my sweatshirt, locked the Subaru, and hurried back down the trail. By the time I returned, Jason and his son were packing up their gear. They wished us well, telling us to be careful, and left around 9:30. Ryan and I lingered a few more minutes, soaking up the last light of day. We finally walked back up to the car just as dusk started settling over the trees. Ryan paused at the bridge, curious about another area he'd noticed across from our pullout. "I'll just take a quick look," he said casually. "You can wait here if you want." I nodded, climbing into the passenger seat of our car, locking the door behind me. Twilight made the trees cast long shadows, shapes that seemed thicker, darker, somehow more watchful than before. A peculiar unease crept into my chest, tightening with every passing second. I tried to shrug it off as residual nerves from Jason's unsettling stories, but I knew that wasn't it. The silence around me had deepened, intensified, heavy enough that my pulse quickened for no clear reason. A few minutes later, Ryan emerged quickly from the trail. His posture rigid, he hurried toward the car. I unlocked the door, letting him inside. His face was pale, tense. "Something wrong?" I asked, already guessing his answer. "Not sure," he murmured, glancing back down the path he'd just left. "I just had this weird feeling like someone was watching me. Did you notice anything up here?" Before I could respond, a familiar shape appeared on the bridge ahead of us. The dark gray truck I'd seen earlier. It rolled slowly to a stop halfway across the bridge, engine idling, blocking our only exit from the pullout. My stomach twisted. "Yeah," I whispered, feeling cold despite the warmth of the sweatshirt I'd retrieved. "I did." My throat tightened as the gray truck idled on the bridge, headlights casting a pale yellow glow against the darkening road. Ryan's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. Neither of us spoke at first. We watched in silent disbelief as the driver's door opened slowly, and a man stepped out. He was thin, probably mid-50s, wearing jeans, a faded plaid shirt, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. In the dimming evening, I couldn't clearly see his face, but I could sense the intensity of his gaze as he walked toward us. Ryan cracked his window just enough to hear, calling out in a careful but firm voice, "Evening, are you the landowner?" The man paused, then stepped closer, hands resting loosely at his sides. "No," he answered, voice quiet and calm. "Just curious what you're doing out here." I shifted uneasily, keeping my eyes fixed straight ahead. Ryan cleared his throat, his voice steady despite the palpable tension. "We were gold panning. Just finishing up, actually. We're heading out now." The man tilted his head slightly, considering Ryan's response. "Gold panning, huh?" he echoed softly. He leaned forward slightly, studying our car, then me specifically. "Just the two of you?" My stomach clenched. His tone wasn't threatening exactly, but the slow drawl made my skin prickle. He stood too close, close enough to grab the car door if he wanted. I felt trapped, hemmed in between the creek on one side and thick forest on the other. "Yeah, just us," Ryan answered coolly, nodding toward the road behind the man's truck. "Mind if we squeeze past?" The man paused for a moment, then stepped back slowly, nodding. "Sure thing." Without another word, he turned and got back into his truck. Ryan released a breath he must have been holding. He put the car in reverse, preparing to back out of the pullout. But before we moved more than a foot, the truck's reverse lights flashed, and the vehicle backed suddenly, blocking our escape again. Then it stopped. The silence was unbearable. The truck sat motionless, engine rumbling softly, taillights casting a red glow across our windshield. My heart hammered. Ryan stayed still, his hand frozen on the gear shift. Suddenly the truck's horn blasted sharply, making me jump. I watched, pulse racing, as the driver's door swung open once more. The man emerged again, moving quicker this time. He approached Ryan's window again, this time stopping even closer. His voice had changed slightly, less friendly, more direct. "Are you folks looking for something out here?" he asked again, voice tighter. Ryan stared directly ahead, avoiding eye contact. "No," he said clearly. "Like I said, we're just leaving." "You know," the man continued, ignoring Ryan's reply, "there's a real nice private campground a mile or so up the road. Peaceful, quiet. Hardly anyone ever goes there. Might be perfect for a young couple like yourselves." He said the last words deliberately, eyes flicking toward me again. A chill crawled down my spine, and I shrank further into the seat. "Thanks, but we're heading home," Ryan repeated firmly, his voice sharper this time. The man stood there silently for several seconds, studying us closely as if deciding something. Finally, he stepped back again, slowly turning toward his truck. He climbed inside, closing the door with deliberate force. After what felt like an eternity, he finally moved the truck forward, clearing our exit. "Go," I whispered urgently, gripping Ryan's arm. Ryan nodded, quickly pulling the car onto the road. As we passed the truck, my eyes involuntarily flicked toward the driver's window. The man's face was expressionless, eyes fixed coldly forward, both hands gripping the wheel. He didn't even glance at us as we drove past, heading back toward the main road. My hands shook slightly as I finally allowed myself to exhale. Ryan glanced at me, his expression grim. "That was way too weird," he muttered. "Who fishes at 10 o'clock at night without gear? Or dogs?" The question lingered heavily between us as we left the creek behind, but before I could even think of a reply, something caught my eye from the darkness ahead. There he was again, standing at the edge of the trail, half hidden by shadows, unmoving and alone. I never intended our anniversary camping trip to become one of those stories we'd talk about for years afterward. It was supposed to be simple, a romantic getaway under the stars, just the two of us. My buddy Dylan had recently inherited several hundred acres of farmland near Resaca, Georgia, and he'd given us permission to use it whenever we wanted. It seemed perfect, quiet, private, secluded, far enough off the grid to disconnect, but still close enough to civilization if we needed anything. At least that's what we assumed. It was August, deep summer in northwest Georgia, where afternoons were thick and hot, and evenings offered only slight relief. I loaded my Ford F-250 diesel with firewood, camping gear, and a tarp big enough to cover the truck bed, giving us a makeshift tent. My girlfriend, now my wife, tossed snacks, blankets, and a small cooler into the back seat. We laughed as we packed, joking about roughing it for the night and pretending we weren't secretly wishing for air conditioning and Wi-Fi. We left home in the late afternoon, driving leisurely along empty back roads through rolling countryside. The late-day sun painted the fields in gold, and the horizon occasionally flickered with distant heat lightning. Nothing unusual for August. Neither of us had reliable cell service out here, but that was part of the charm. No distractions, just us. Turning off onto Dylan's land, we followed a winding dirt track nearly a mile into the property, leaving the main road far behind. Eventually, the trees opened into a huge harvested cornfield stretching toward a distant tree line. Beyond that, I knew, was the Ustanala River, normally slow and quiet this time of year. We chose a spot about 100 yards from the riverbank. The ground was firm but dusty beneath the tires. I made a mental note that if rain did come, it might get muddy fast. But looking at the clear sky above us, rain seemed unlikely. The air felt calm, heavy, like it was holding its breath. I backed the truck into position and set up camp, stretching the tarp over the bed and tying it down tight. The tarp formed a canopy above the mattress, giving us privacy and shelter while still letting us see the stars. Nearby, I stacked our firewood and got a fire started, the flames crackling softly as night fell. Dinner was steaks in the cast-iron skillet, the scent of smoke and meat mingling with the sound of cicadas humming in the distant trees. We ate sitting side by side on the tailgate, talking quietly, watching heat lightning dance on the horizon, still far away. It felt like we had the entire world to ourselves, and the peace of it all made the stress of everyday life seem far away. Around midnight, with the embers dying down, we crawled under the tarp and lay back on the air mattress. My eyes grew heavy, lulled by the quiet rustling of the tarp overhead. She curled up beside me, head resting on my chest, breathing softly as sleep claimed her quickly. I don't know how long I slept before a low rumble of thunder pulled me awake. I blinked into the darkness, instantly alert. My girlfriend didn't stir. Outside, the flashes of lightning were brighter now, quicker, and I felt a subtle breeze begin to ripple the tarp. Reaching for my phone, I checked for a weather update, but the screen showed no signal. The rumbling grew louder, closer, a gentle reminder that storms could come quickly around here, even from nowhere. I lay still for a moment, hoping the storm might pass north of us, but something in my gut told me otherwise. Just as I decided to wake her, the first heavy drops struck the tarp, sharp taps like a warning. My pulse quickened. "Hey," I whispered urgently, nudging her awake. "We might have to move." She groaned softly, still half asleep. "What? Why? The answer came before I could speak again. A violent gust of wind slammed into the tarp, shaking it fiercely as sheets of rain began pouring sideways, driven hard by the sudden storm. Within seconds, water dripped through gaps in the fabric, soaking us. "Wake up! Get dressed! We gotta go!" I shouted, adrenaline kicking in hard. Jumping from the mattress, I pulled my boots on quickly, feeling the truck bed tremble beneath me from the wind's force. My girlfriend was scrambling to her feet now, confusion in her eyes replaced by sudden urgency. The storm had gone from distant murmurs to a roaring assault without any warning. As I leaped down from the truck into the thickening mud, lightning illuminated the field in vivid flashes, revealing just how isolated we really were. The once firm, dry ground was already slick and shifting underfoot, each step threatening to pull my boots off. We had no idea then how quickly our perfect night would spiral into a fight for survival, nor how close the Oostanala River was creeping toward us, its silent surge hidden by the deafening storm. The rain hit hard, relentless and biting, like icy needles against our skin. The world seemed to collapse around us into darkness, interrupted only by the harsh glow of lightning. My heart was pounding, and my pulse echoed in my ears louder than the storm itself. "We gotta move fast," I shouted, struggling to be heard over the violent wind. "Get the straps. We need to take the tarp down before it rips loose." She nodded sharply, her soaked hair plastered to her face, eyes wide with fear and determination. We fumbled with the drenched nylon straps, fingers numbed by rain and urgency. Each second that passed felt like a minute. When the tarp finally loosened, the wind caught it immediately, whipping it free and sending it tumbling across the muddy field like a lost kite. "Forget it!" I yelled, turning toward the smoldering remains of our campfire. The fire was nearly out, extinguished by the driving rain, but the glowing embers hissed defiantly beneath the water pooling around them. I sprinted toward the driver's side door, boots sinking deep into the thick mud. I climbed up, slipping, pulling myself awkwardly into the cab. She scrambled into the passenger seat, slamming the door behind her. Our heavy breathing filled the cramped space, the windows fogging instantly. I turned the key, and the diesel engine rumbled to life. "Hold on tight," I warned, flipping the four-wheel drive switch to high. The truck lurched forward as I pressed down on the gas, tires spinning wildly, mud spraying high against the windows. For a brief moment, we surged forward, but then I felt the heavy weight of the truck bog down again. The tires spun uselessly, sinking deeper with each attempt. My stomach clenched in panic. "We're stuck. We need traction." I pointed out at the dark shape of the stacked firewood near the now extinguished campfire. "We've got to get that wood under the tires." We leaped from the truck again, stepping into water that had pooled ankle-deep in just minutes. Each step was exhausting, as if the mud itself was determined to keep us there. We carried armfuls of firewood, stumbling and sliding, desperate to reach the tires. Another flash of lightning lit the field, and for the first time, I saw clearly how quickly the situation was deteriorating. My flashlight swept toward the riverbank, and my heart sank at the sight. The Oostanala, gentle and calm hours earlier, was now a black torrent rushing swiftly across its banks, spreading rapidly toward us. Our campsite was quickly becoming part of the river. "The water's coming up fast!" I shouted, breathless. "We have maybe one chance, then we have to leave the truck and run." She stared at me in disbelief, her breathing rapid, eyes filled with fear. But something stronger, something determined, set in. She nodded fiercely, and we placed firewood pieces under each tire as rapidly as our numb hands could move. My lungs burned from the effort, and mud clung thick to our clothes, heavy and cold. "Get ready," I yelled. "As soon as I hit the gas, keep throwing more under." Back in the cab, hands trembling, I slammed the pedal down. The engine roared angrily, tires grinding against the firewood beneath. At first, there was nothing, just more spinning, the frustrating grind of rubber against wet bark. "Throw more!" I screamed out the open window. She hurled smaller chunks of wood desperately beneath the spinning wheels. The truck jolted forward slightly. Encouraged, I floored it again. Slowly, inch by stubborn inch, the tires found grip. The truck inched forward, wheels clawing desperately through mud and wood. "Keep going!" I yelled again, panic in my voice, knowing the river was closing in behind us. With a final, violent surge, the truck broke free, lurching forward onto slightly firmer ground. My hands trembled uncontrollably, adrenaline pumping wildly through me as we crawled slowly toward the dirt track we'd arrived on. Behind us, the field was quickly disappearing beneath rising water. As we reached the narrow dirt track, relief surged through me. I glanced over at her, soaking wet, mud-smeared and breathing heavily, but safe. The main road lay just ahead. I didn't dare look back at the now submerged campsite. All that mattered was getting away from that rising river. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say, not yet. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles pale beneath the mud coating my skin. The storm still raged violently, but it seemed distant now, muted by shock and exhaustion. We drove in silence toward the safety of town, leaving behind the muddy field, the rising water, and the night that had nearly claimed us. We reached the paved road, tires finally gripping the stable asphalt. I exhaled a deep breath, suddenly aware of how tightly I'd been clenching my jaw. Beside me, she sat motionless, soaked through and covered head to toe in mud. Her eyes stared straight ahead, reflecting the glow of passing streetlights as we drove into Calhoun. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. The tension of what we'd just survived sat heavy between us. Pulling into the dimly lit parking lot of the first motel we saw, I parked under the overhang near the office door. The storm still raged around us, rain hammering the roof with a steady, relentless rhythm. Without a word, we climbed out of the truck and stepped onto solid ground, our boots leaving thick trails of muddy water on the concrete. When we entered the small motel lobby, the clerk, a thin, tired-looking man in his late 50s, lifted his head from a worn paperback. His eyes widened as he took in the sight of us, standing dripping and exhausted in front of his counter. "You two all right?" he asked slowly, eyes darting between us. I glanced down at the mud caked on our clothes, at the water pooling on the tile beneath us, and forced a shaky smile. "We got caught camping by the Ustanala," I said, struggling to steady my voice. "The river came up fast, flooded the field, barely got our truck out in time." He nodded slowly, his expression one of genuine concern. Without another question, he turned, took a key from behind him, and placed it firmly on the counter. "Room's on me tonight," he said quietly. "Glad you made it out." Relief washed over me as I thanked him, grabbing the key and heading silently toward our room. Inside, we peeled off our ruined clothes and showered the thick Georgia mud from our skin. The warm water stung slightly against scratches I hadn't realized I'd gotten while scrambling through the storm, but I barely noticed. As exhaustion finally took hold, we lay down side by side on the clean motel sheets, neither of us sleeping easily. The next morning, sunlight forced its way around the curtains, spilling into the dim room. I sat up slowly, muscles aching from the night's struggle. Outside, the world looked deceptively calm. We dressed silently, still processing what we'd survived. The storm had passed, leaving behind soaked pavement and a clean, fresh scent in the air. Curiosity and disbelief drew us back toward Dylan's land. When we reached the entrance to the farm, the muddy track was unrecognizable. Parking the truck by the road, we walked cautiously back toward the cornfield. My heart tightened at the sight before us. What had been dry, open land was now submerged beneath several feet of brown, swiftly moving water. The place we'd parked the truck, where we'd nearly lost our fight against the mud, was now completely underwater. We stood quietly, looking out across the flooded land. A chill crawled down my spine at the realization of how narrow our escape had truly been. Another 5 minutes of hesitation, and we wouldn't have made it out. Later that afternoon, Dylan called. I answered slowly, not fully ready to retell the night's events. But when I explained what had happened, the line went silent. He finally spoke, his voice low and stunned. "I've only seen that river flood once in 50 years, he said quietly. Never anything like that. After hanging up, I leaned back in the chair, my thoughts drifting to how quickly our quiet night had become a desperate fight to escape. My girlfriend took my hand, squeezing gently. "You know," she said softly, "I think hotels sound nice from now on." A faint smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. She was right. We'd never return to that kind of camping again. The thrill of wilderness adventures had lost its appeal, but we both knew that night would stay with us forever. A reminder of just how quickly nature can shift from calm beauty to something deadly and merciless. We married a year later. Almost a decade has passed since that August night. Even now, whenever we hear the distant rumble of thunder, we share a quiet glance, a silent promise never to underestimate the power of a rising river again. I grew up spending summers on my grandparents' land, nestled deep in Oregon's Wallowa Mountains, not far from the little town of Joseph. Our family had owned the 1,500-acre spread for generations, the house itself built back in the 1960s by my great-grandfather. The sprawling acreage was mostly forested, with endless stands of towering pines and firs, dotted by rugged slopes and cool, shaded hollows. Growing up there felt safe, peaceful, and boundless, except for one place. About 600 yards west of the main house, just beyond a rough-cut game trail and down a slight dip, lay a patch of woods we all instinctively avoided. There wasn't anything outwardly sinister about it at first glance. It was just another cluster of trees, just another piece of forest. But even as kids, we learned quickly never to cross that unseen line. My older cousins didn't explain why. When I asked, they'd just look uncomfortable, shrug, and say they didn't like the feel of the place. Adults dismissed it as childish fears of cougars or coyotes, but I noticed they avoided it too. By the time I was 10, the rule was etched deeply in my mind. Don't go past that point. Then Emily came along. She was my best friend from school, an adventurous kid from Portland who was staying with me for a week in July of 2005. Her city upbringing had given her a bravado that I admired and occasionally feared. She laughed at ghost stories, scoffed at scary movies, and was absolutely fearless when it came to exploring. Naturally, when I mentioned the off-limits patch of forest, she insisted we go there immediately. "It's just trees," she laughed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Come on, let's build a fort." I was hesitant, but I couldn't resist her confidence. So, early that afternoon, we snuck some tools and gloves from my grandpa's barn and headed out past the familiar pines, towards the area we'd always avoided. Walking deeper into that section, it was hard to explain exactly why the place felt wrong. The sun shone as brightly there as it did everywhere else. The trees were healthy and tall, but something gradually shifted as we entered. The cheerful chatter between us faded, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Neither of us mentioned it at first, but soon it was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just quiet, it was utterly still, like we had crossed some invisible barrier into a vacuum. Emily hesitated a moment, glancing back towards the house, but shrugged it off and started collecting sticks and branches for our lean-to fort. We worked quickly at first, piling up larger branches against a stout fir tree, creating a rough shelter that began to take shape. But the further along we got, the more strained and uneasy our movements became. My heart was beating quicker, my throat dry and scratchy. I tried to shake off the feeling, but a prickly, crawling sensation crept up my spine and wouldn't leave. Emily had stopped talking completely, her earlier enthusiasm replaced by nervous glances and jerky movements. At one point, I caught her staring at the woods around us, eyes wide, clearly on edge. "You okay?" I asked quietly. "Yeah," she whispered, but her voice sounded strained and unsure. As the afternoon wore on, each snap of a twig beneath our boots seemed louder than the last, echoing unnaturally in the stillness. My pulse quickened, adrenaline building for no obvious reason. Soon we weren't even pretending to work, just standing there, frozen, staring into the shadowed gaps between the trees. Then, abruptly, something shifted. It wasn't a sound or a clear movement, just a sudden, overwhelming instinct that we needed to run. I saw it in Emily's eyes, the same desperate urge to flee, and without a word or signal, we both turned and sprinted from that clearing, dropping gloves and tools where we stood. We crashed recklessly through the underbrush, panic driving our feet. Branches whipped our arms and faces, and our breath came in sharp, painful gasps. We didn't slow down until we burst from the tree line into the clearing around the house, chests heaving, tears streaming silently down both our faces. We stumbled onto the porch, shaking, our terrified eyes meeting in unspoken agreement that neither of us could explain what had just happened. My grandmother found us there and asked what was wrong. Neither Emily nor I could articulate an answer. All I knew was that the forest behind us, usually full of familiar evening sounds, was now dreadfully quiet. No crickets, no frogs, no coyotes, just a silence so profound it pressed down like a physical weight. That night, we huddled together in my small bedroom, afraid to speak, afraid even to breathe loudly, listening desperately for anything outside. But nothing stirred. The oppressive quiet outside the window lingered through the night, and it felt as if whatever had chased us from the clearing was still out there, watching, waiting. I woke up early, startled awake by the thin gray morning light filtering through the curtains. Emily was already sitting up next to me, eyes wide and shadowed from lack of sleep. Neither of us had slept well, each drifting in and out of restless dreams punctuated by jolts of anxiety. I couldn't shake the sense of dread from the day before, still vivid and fresh. Breakfast was tense. We avoided talking about the clearing, trying instead to force casual conversation about cartoons or swimming. But even my grandparents could tell something was off. They exchanged worried looks across the table, but didn't push us. I wished they would ask, almost hoped they would forbid us from going anywhere near the forest again. When we finally stepped outside after breakfast, the summer air felt heavy, too warm, too still. Emily stood silently looking west, toward the tree line. I knew exactly what she was thinking. We'd left behind my grandfather's tools, his good gloves, and even though we were terrified, neither of us could stomach the idea of admitting to my grandparents that we'd abandoned their things. Emily finally broke the silence. "We should just get it over with." I nodded, barely managing a whispered, "Yeah." We walked slowly at first, moving deliberately toward the trees, each step dragging more than the last. Our earlier confidence was completely gone, replaced by dread as we reached the edge of the forbidden patch of woods. I hesitated, standing right at the invisible line we'd always avoided. Emily took a shaky breath, then stepped across first. "Come on," she said, sounding less sure than she probably meant to. I followed, my heart hammering again as the trees swallowed us up. The forest was quiet, too quiet. I strained my ears, hoping desperately for any normal woodland sounds, a bird, an insect buzzing, anything. Instead, only our footsteps broke the silence, each crunch of pine needles sounding painfully loud. When we reached the clearing, Emily froze so suddenly that I nearly collided with her. I stepped around her slowly, and the scene came sharply into view. In the center of our unfinished fort was a deer, lying awkwardly on its side, its neck twisted at an unnatural angle. The animal's throat was ripped wide open, torn brutally apart in a single savage motion. Blood had pooled around the wound, fresh and shining in the sunlight, but strangely, the deer appeared untouched otherwise. No scavengers had disturbed it, no predators had dragged it away to feed. It looked deliberately placed, as though left there specifically for us to find. My stomach lurched violently. Emily gagged softly beside me, stepping back. And then we saw them. The gloves and tools we'd dropped when we'd fled. They weren't scattered across the ground anymore. Instead, each item had been carefully gathered and arranged into a neat pile directly beside the deer's head, precise enough that it couldn't possibly have happened by chance. One glove was missing. We stood motionless for a moment, horror flooding through me. I could hear Emily's breathing quicken sharply, mirroring my own growing panic. "We have to leave," she whispered. I nodded numbly, barely able to speak. "Grab the stuff," I choked out. We lunged forward. snatching the tools and gloves from the ground in a chaotic frenzy, careful not to look too closely at the deer. In moments, we were sprinting again, racing through the underbrush as fast as our legs could carry us. Branches slapped painfully at my arms and face, but I felt none of it. My mind locked only on getting away. Bursting free from the trees, we didn't stop until we reached the safety of the house. On the porch, we dropped everything in a heap, gasping for breath. Emily looked as pale and shaken as I felt. "What are we going to tell your grandparents?" she asked quietly, voice shaking. I shook my head, trying to think of any believable explanation. "We just tell them we found the deer like that, and we don't mention the gloves or the tools. Maybe they won't notice one missing glove." Emily nodded uncertainly. Neither of us said what we were really thinking, that none of it made sense, and that there was no logical explanation for what we'd seen. Later, after dinner, while Emily showered, I stepped onto the porch, hoping the evening air would calm my nerves. But my relief was short-lived. My eyes fell to the bench just below the bedroom window, and my breath stopped cold. There sat the missing glove, mud-streaked and worn, carefully laid out as though waiting to be found. I stood frozen, unable to move, staring at it as a cold shiver rippled through me. It hadn't been there before, I was sure of it. Something had followed us back. 20 years passed before I returned to the house again. My grandparents had both passed away, leaving the land to my parents, and eventually to me. It felt strange to stand in the old gravel driveway, looking up at the familiar home set against a backdrop of thick evergreens. Even after so much time, just seeing the forest filled me with dread. I spent the first day checking the house, walking slowly through the rooms, touching old photographs, and soaking up the quiet nostalgia. But by evening my eyes kept drifting to the west window, toward the same cluster of trees that still pulled at my memories. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the yard, and once again that old uncomfortable feeling settled over me. I forced myself to sit outside on the porch, nursing a beer and trying to pretend I wasn't nervous. The trees loomed dark and quiet in the twilight, exactly as they had 2 decades earlier. The stillness was unsettling, unnatural. No wind, no distant sounds of wildlife, just heavy silence. I finally gave up, retreating into the house to lock every door and window before going to bed. Sleep never came. I lay awake in my grandparents' old bedroom, eyes fixed nervously on the ceiling. My thoughts circled back endlessly to the deer, the neatly stacked tools, the missing glove placed so carefully on the bench. I'd tried to forget it for 20 years, rationalizing that childhood memories could twist over time, but now, back in this house, every detail returned vividly. Around midnight, something triggered the motion-activated porch light outside the bedroom window, flooding the room with a sudden pale glow. My heart jumped into my throat. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing, listening hard. Gravel crunched softly, just once, under a slow, deliberate footstep. My pulse pounded in my ears. Every muscle in my body tensed painfully, paralyzed with a terror I hadn't felt since I was 10 years old. Carefully, I slid out of bed and crept toward the window, peering through a narrow gap in the curtains. A figure stood on the porch. Its outline was indistinct, tall, hunched, partially hidden in shadow. It faced away, standing motionless just inches from the bench. My breath caught painfully in my chest as I watched, waiting for any movement, but it stood impossibly still. Then slowly, its head turned toward the window, directly toward me. I recoiled, flattening myself against the wall, pulse racing. Seconds passed in agonizing silence, each heartbeat feeling like a hammer blow. A single step creaked on the wooden porch. Then came the sound I'd been dreading, one sharp, deliberate knock on the bedroom window. Not loud, but purposeful and clear. A simple signal. One knock, no more. I sank down slowly, sliding onto the floor, my back pressed against the cold plaster wall. My breathing came in short, ragged gasps. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare look again. Hours dragged by in silence. Only when the pale light of morning finally seeped through the curtains did I summon the courage to rise on trembling legs. Carefully, slowly, I approached the window again, pulling the curtain aside to look out onto the porch. It was empty now, bathed in gray morning light. Gathering every scrap of courage, I opened the front door, stepping cautiously onto the porch. My gaze fell immediately to the bench beneath the window. There, placed carefully and deliberately, lay a single unfamiliar glove. It was old leather, cracked and worn from years of use. Nothing like the gloves my grandfather had once owned. My hand shaking, I picked it up. Something was tucked inside it, and I withdrew it slowly. A broken piece of antler, still fresh, slightly damp at the break, rested in my palm. My breath came faster as panic began rising inside me. Glancing up toward the tree line, I felt the weight of unseen eyes watching from the shadows beneath the trees. I knew in that instant I would never spend another night in this house. Within weeks, I arranged to sell the land to a conservation group, signing documents with one strict condition: no trails, no buildings, no campsites. Nothing would ever be constructed west of the main ridge. I didn't explain why, and they didn't ask. Driving away for the last time, I glanced briefly at that patch of forest in my rearview mirror. Whatever had been waiting there had remained patient and quiet for all these years. And whatever it was, I understood clearly now. It didn't want company. I've always loved Algonquin Provincial Park, especially during the dead quiet of winter. The park is huge, sprawling across miles of Ontario's untouched wilderness. Most people avoid the backcountry trails in late December. The snow makes hiking more challenging, the temperature drops dramatically, and daylight doesn't last. But that's exactly why I go. My name's Mark Delorier. I'm 32, live alone, and work remotely, which gives me the freedom to escape into the wilderness whenever I want. Usually my hikes are just me and my Labrador retriever Toby. He's a good dog, calm but alert. He makes me feel safer when the woods get a little too quiet. This particular hike happened about 5 years ago. It was a crisp winter afternoon, clear and still, the kind of day I lived for. Toby and I arrived at the Brent Road trailhead around 1:15 in the afternoon. It's a lesser-used entry point, especially this time of year. The parking lot was empty, just the way I liked it. I grabbed my backpack, checked my watch, and estimated about 4 hours for our loop, cutting it close but manageable. We set out at a steady pace. The trail was familiar enough, winding through dense forest, past frozen lakes and streams, up and down gently rolling hills. 2 hours into the hike, we stopped at a clearing overlooking a small frozen lake. I tossed Toby a stick while I caught my breath and drank some water. The hills surrounding us cut sharply into the sky, casting long shadows across the clearing. It was quiet, the kind of silence you only find miles from civilization. Checking the time, I was surprised to see how fast the afternoon had passed. It was already nearing 4:20, and the light was fading faster than expected. I cursed myself silently for not accounting better for winter's early dusk. My GPS confirmed my worry. We still had about 45 minutes left before reaching the car, and darkness was closing in rapidly. We headed back onto the trail, Toby trotting happily ahead of me, when I noticed something odd just off the side of the path. I paused. Clearly pressed into the fresh snow was a single boot print, much larger than my own. It wasn't mine, and we hadn't passed anyone. Strange, but maybe someone had ventured off trail earlier in the day. Yet scanning around, I couldn't see any other footprints leading away or toward it. Just one isolated boot print. An uneasy feeling crept over me, but I brushed it off. No sense in spooking myself out here. Toby sniffed briefly at the print but didn't seem bothered, so we pressed on. Another 10 minutes passed. The trees thickened around us, the shadows deepened, and soon we emerged into a larger snow-covered field. The sky had darkened to a heavy dusk, with only faint blue-gray hues filtering through the clouds above. My heart quickened involuntarily. This was not the place to lose daylight. I picked up the pace. Halfway across the field, something hit me, hard, a deep instinctual sense of dread that surged from my stomach into my chest. Every hair on my body seemed to stand straight. I stopped walking. Toby sensed it too, freezing in his tracks, ears pulled back, tail lowered. Slowly, almost reluctantly, I turned to glance behind me. At the far edge of the field stood a figure, a distinct human shape silhouetted against the dark line of trees. It was motionless, darker than the trees behind it, no details visible, just an outline. Even at a distance, the presence felt threatening. My heart pounded furiously. Who was this, and why hadn't I seen or heard them approaching? There'd been no other vehicles at the trailhead, no logical reason for anyone else to be here, especially after dark. Toby let out a quiet, uneasy growl. "Easy," I whispered, more to myself than to him, as if the sound of my voice could soothe away the growing panic. But my gut knew better. Whoever that was, they weren't friendly. They were standing utterly still, watching me, waiting for something, waiting for me to make a move. I didn't hesitate any longer. Adrenaline flooding my veins, I grabbed Toby's leash tight and shouted, "Come on!" We turned, sprinting full tilt down the trail, snow crunching loudly underfoot, pulse hammering in my ears. The figure hadn't moved yet, but every instinct told me he would. And when he did, he'd be coming fast. My legs pumped faster than they ever had before. The world became a blur of white and shadow, branches whipping past my face, my breath coming in painful, sharp bursts of cold air. Toby ran beside me, leash taut, matching my frantic pace. I didn't dare look behind me, not yet. All I could think about was getting to the car. My heart slammed against my ribs. The adrenaline blocked out everything but the trail directly ahead. I nearly lost my footing multiple times, sliding down small embankments and scrambling over exposed roots, but I refused to slow down. The figure behind us might not have moved at first, but I knew, deep in my bones, it was following now. We covered ground at an impossible speed, cutting through forest sections I'd usually carefully pick my way across. The snow beneath my feet became treacherous, slick and unpredictable, and each stride felt like it might send me sprawling onto the ice. But the fear of whatever chased us kept me moving. Finally, lungs burning, I saw the switchback looming ahead, the steep final climb up the wooded slope toward the parking lot. Relief flashed through me momentarily, tempered instantly by dread at how exposed we'd be climbing that hill. I didn't have a choice. I hit the bottom of the switchback, immediately feeling the steep incline bite into my thighs. Zigzagging back and forth up the narrow trail, my pace inevitably slowed, my muscles screaming in protest. Halfway up, I dared a quick glance backward. The figure stood at the base of the hill, perfectly still. A wave of nausea hit me. For a split second, I wondered if he might just stand there, if perhaps he'd give up now that I had such a head start. But then he began moving, not slowly, not cautiously. He exploded forward, sprinting straight up the hillside, cutting directly across the trail, ignoring the path altogether. He moved without hesitation, as if the steep slope and icy ground didn't exist at all. "Crap!" I gasped out loud. Terror flooded me anew, forcing strength back into my exhausted legs. I turned upward again, desperately clawing at the ground, slipping repeatedly on patches of slick ice. Toby barked urgently, sensing the panic radiating from me. Near the top, lungs searing from the cold, I yelled over my shoulder at the man charging toward me. "F off!" No response, no acknowledgement, just silent, relentless pursuit, the distance between us shrinking with horrifying speed. I reached the top, the trees thinning abruptly as the parking lot opened up before me. My Subaru sat waiting just ahead, alone, or so I thought. As I raced toward it, I stopped dead in my tracks. Beside my car was another vehicle, a black truck parked directly next to mine. That wasn't there earlier. Nobody else had been here when I arrived, and I'd seen no other hikers on the trail. My stomach twisted violently. Whoever this man was, he'd been here all along, waiting patiently for me. Fumbling frantically for my keys, fingers numb and trembling uncontrollably, I dropped them onto the snow. "No!" I shouted, desperation surging. Behind me, footsteps crunched rapidly up the final incline. Toby spun in place, whining anxiously, pulling at the leash in confusion. Snatching the keys back up, I jammed them into the lock, twisted hard, and yanked the door open. I hurled Toby inside first, slamming the door shut just as the figure reached my car. For an instant, time seemed to freeze. He didn't pound on my window. He didn't reach for the door handle or shout or threaten me. Instead, he pivoted sharply, sprinting directly to the truck parked beside mine. Without hesitation, he climbed in, fired up the engine, and slammed the accelerator. The truck roared, skidding wildly on the frozen lot, fishtailing violently. Black smoke poured from the exhaust as the vehicle tore recklessly away, barreling down Brent Road and disappearing into the dark woods. The silence left behind was deafening. I sat stunned, paralyzed by confusion and lingering terror. My breath fogged the inside of the window, rapid and uneven. Toby leaned against me, quietly whimpering, ears pinned back. I didn't move. I couldn't. My gaze locked on the blackened skid marks etched into the snow-covered pavement. Minutes turned into an hour, then 2. I couldn't bring myself to drive, terrified the truck might return. I sat there in the darkness, unable to process what had just happened. The figure had been waiting. That truck had been waiting. Waiting specifically for me. It was nearly 3 hours before I finally felt calm enough to start the car and leave the trailhead. The inside of the vehicle was bitterly cold now, my breath visible in rapid bursts. Toby stayed close, eyes watchful, quiet as he pressed himself against my leg. I forced myself to think rationally. Maybe this person had followed me into the park, or maybe they'd seen me park earlier and waited until dusk. But neither explanation fully eased the fear gripping my chest. The park had been empty when I'd arrived. No other vehicles in sight. I couldn't explain how the truck had suddenly appeared beside my car, or why the figure had pursued me so silently and relentlessly through the woods. I started the engine. Its familiar rumble brought a thin wave of relief, though my hands shook so badly I had trouble steering out of the lot. On the drive back home, every shadow along the road looked like the truck. Every vehicle that passed caused my pulse to spike, eyes scanning the rearview mirror for headlights that might follow too closely. After arriving home, I locked every door and window. I turned on lights throughout the house, double-checking each lock repeatedly. Toby paced restlessly, feeding off my anxious energy. That night, sleep came only in short, broken intervals. Each time I drifted off, I jolted awake, imagining the figure at my window, staring silently through the glass. Early the next morning, I called Ontario Provincial Police, explaining the entire ordeal in detail. They sent an officer over, who listened patiently, taking notes and promising they'd check park logs and security cameras along the main road. But his expression was skeptical, polite but doubtful of my story. I didn't blame him. It sounded unbelievable, even to me. Days passed without word from the police. Frustration gnawed at me. I had to understand, had to prove to myself that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. So, after a week of anxious hesitation, I decided to return to Brent Road, not to hike, just to confirm what had happened. The drive back to Algonquin was tense, filled with dread. The park was silent and empty once again. Though in daylight, it felt less oppressive. Still, memories of that night filled every corner of my mind. Leaving Toby safely in the car, I walked slowly back toward the switchback, heart quickening as I approached the spot where I'd seen the figure first. The trail seemed peaceful now, almost serene beneath a fresh coat of snow, but as I approached the bottom of the slope, I spotted something chilling. There they were, my tracks, erratic, zigzagging sharply up the hillside. Beside them, starkly visible in daylight, were the stranger's boot prints. They didn't follow the trail. Instead, they ran directly up the slope, deeply impressed, widely spaced. Whoever this was had been moving with terrifying strength and determination. Cold dread settled heavily in my gut. Following a hunch, I retraced my steps carefully back to the clearing where I'd first noticed the figure. Approaching cautiously, I stopped dead. The single boot print I'd noticed days ago was still clearly visible, frozen solid into the snow. But now, seeing it again, something struck me as impossible. There were no other footprints leading to or away from this single print. It was completely isolated, as though the person had simply appeared in place, waiting there without movement for hours, perhaps even days, watching the trail, waiting for someone, waiting for me. My skin prickled with a sudden overwhelming realization. He hadn't stumbled upon me. He hadn't followed me on a whim. He had known exactly where I'd be and had positioned himself perfectly to intercept me, to trap me in darkness. But how? Why? The silence around me grew oppressive again, pressing in heavily. I backed slowly away, heart hammering once more. I didn't want answers anymore. All I wanted was to leave and never come back. As I hurried back to the car, an uncomfortable certainty settled over me. Whoever had chased me that night was still out there, free, untraced, and unknown. They knew the park better than I did, could appear silently and vanish without a trace, leaving nothing behind but impossible footprints and unanswered questions. I climbed quickly into the vehicle, locked the doors, and drove away faster than I probably should have. Toby leaned against me, sensing my urgency. As the miles passed behind us, I vowed never again to enter that park alone. To this day, when the nights grow long and the snow falls thickly outside my window, my mind drifts inevitably back to Brent Road, to the silent figure waiting patiently in the dark, and to the moment when I dropped my keys. Because I know exactly how close I'd come, how if I'd hesitated even a second longer I wouldn't be here now, recounting my narrow escape. I've never been a good sleeper, especially outdoors. Anxiety and the woods are a tricky combination, but I'd been trying to push past it. My partner and I had been bikepacking through Olympic National Park, spending the weekend near the old Olympic Hot Springs Trail. Our campsite wasn't far from Boulder Creek, near a trailhead abandoned years ago, after landslides and shifting landscapes erased its popularity. Though quiet and remote, the place was beautiful. Dense trees, mist in the early morning, a picturesque solitude we'd sought out intentionally. It was the last morning of our trip, and we had planned a long ride back out, so when I woke at around 5, still fully dark, with only a faint promise of dawn, I decided to get moving rather than lie awake listening to the random sounds of the forest. My partner was still asleep, breathing softly beside me. Outside, the woods were quiet, save for distant rustling. Birds or squirrels, I assumed. Nothing unusual. The silence was heavy enough to amplify any small sound, and I felt hyper-aware of every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves as I moved around camp with my headlamp cutting a beam through the darkness. I glanced at the trail leading toward the pit toilet, hesitating. The outhouse was probably 100 feet away, too far to comfortably navigate in the dark, alone, at least for someone like me. Feeling slightly foolish for my fear, I moved just beyond our tent into a thick patch of brush, no more than 10 feet from camp. I switched off my headlamp briefly, listening carefully. As my eyes adjusted, a faint sound caught my attention, quiet murmuring, almost human voices, drifting softly from somewhere down the slope. I squinted into the shadows, peering through the silhouettes of trees toward a ravine 50 feet away. The murmurs rose and fell, indistinct but undeniably real. Flicking my headlamp back on, I swung its beam toward the sound, and the pale circle of light revealed something reflective in the brush. Silvery material, shiny and unnatural. A sleeping bag? Emergency blanket? Someone camping without a tent. The murmurs stopped briefly, then continued again, a gentle rhythm like quiet conversation. Feeling relieved to have an explanation, I shook off the unease and headed back toward the tent. My partner was already awake now, beginning to pull gear together, and I quietly mentioned the nearby campers as we started packing. Neither of us were particularly loud, respecting their apparent rest, keeping our voices low as we stowed our gear. Daylight began to bleed into the sky, pale streaks slowly diluting the shadows. Then, from the large cedar next to our camp, just 10 feet away, came a sudden, sharp crack. It was loud enough to make us both pause, looking up expectantly. Another crack followed immediately, sounding exactly like a large branch breaking under heavy weight. My heart thumped unevenly as we both shined our lights upward into the tree, expecting to see movement. But there was nothing. No falling branches, no swaying limbs, nothing. My partner muttered under his breath, maybe a bear or a big bird? But even as he spoke, he was clearly uncertain. Another loud, wrenching snap echoed from the tree, followed by the unmistakable sound of something heavy rustling, shifting among branches. Sound so vivid that it was impossible to reconcile with the absolute stillness above us. We continued packing hastily, both of us now fully alert, occasionally glancing upward, trying to rationalize what we were hearing. My hand drifted to my pocket, fingers brushing the handle of my knife, a tiny comfort that felt absurd against whatever unknown thing was causing the invisible chaos above us. My partner retrieved the bear spray from his pack, holding it at his side. The noise continued, intermittent but unmistakable. Deep cracks, the grinding rustle of heavy movement. The tree remained utterly motionless. "Let's try to scare it off," I said, louder now, trying to steady the slight tremble in my voice. We clapped loudly, shouting a few times, hoping to chase away whatever animal might be hidden up there. But nothing reacted. There was no hurried retreat through the branches, no startled flutter of wings, just the continued, rhythmic cracking, now punctuated by softer thumps, as if heavy objects were being tossed to the ground, though nothing actually fell. The rising sun was slowly providing clarity, painting the forest around us in shades of gray and muted green. Yet even in the clearer daylight, the source of the sound remained invisible, intangible, impossible to understand. I felt a creeping dread in my stomach, colder and deeper than any simple anxiety I'd felt before. It felt irrational, like panic barely suppressed, but I fought to keep my composure. We just needed to leave. "We should get moving," my partner said, his voice carefully neutral, though I saw his eyes darting around uncertainly. Our bikes now loaded, we wheeled them quickly toward the main trail, closer to the pit toilets. Still, from that tree came the sharp, insistent cracks, echoing in the otherwise still air. As we reached the clearing near the trailhead, I glanced once more toward the ravine where the sleeping bag had been. The morning light revealed clearly what darkness had distorted. There was no sleeping bag, no campers at all. Instead, the reflective surface was the aluminum drainage pipes protruding from beneath the trailhead. They gleamed innocently in the daylight, mocking my earlier confidence. The murmurs were gone, vanished with the illusion of other campers. We were utterly alone, and now, even more inexplicably, the cracking from the tree behind us had suddenly intensified, as if triggered by my realization. The noise became violent, snapping like bones under pressure, sounding impossibly heavy and aggressive. My partner glanced at me nervously, hurriedly leaning his bike against a nearby post and disappearing quickly into the outhouse. Standing alone, exposed, I stared back at the cedar tree across the clearing. I was trembling, no longer able to mask my fear. Whatever this was, it wasn't right. There was no animal large enough to remain unseen while causing that kind of chaos. I clapped again, louder this time, yelling at the tree, at the emptiness around me, feeling my voice grow desperate. "Get away!" I shouted, my voice echoing faintly off distant trees. The cracking continued, a harsh, relentless response. My partner emerged from the outhouse, stepping quickly toward me, and the moment he stepped fully into view, everything ceased. The silence was instant, suffocating, total. Not a leaf rustled, not a branch shifted. We shared a look, fear mirrored in each other's faces. Wordlessly, we secured our gear, glanced warily at the now silent tree, and pushed our bikes onto the trail. We needed to leave, and we needed to leave now. We quickly pushed our bikes to the trailhead, moving quietly, tension thick between us. Behind us the tree stood silent, as though nothing had happened. My partner's face was pale, and I could feel my heart pounding unevenly. It was hard to shake the feeling of being watched, even though the morning was growing brighter, the sun pushing weakly through the misty layers of cloud above the forest. At the trailhead we paused, taking a moment to secure the final gear on our bikes. I found myself repeatedly glancing back toward the cedar tree, half expecting the noise to erupt again, but the tree remained quiet, its branches perfectly still. I was struck by how ordinary it looked in the daylight. Nothing about it suggested the violent noises that had nearly sent me into panic moments ago. "You good?" my partner asked, clearly trying to mask his own unease with calm concern. "Yeah," I replied quietly, unable to fully meet his eyes. "Let's just get going." As we began fastening our bags and double-checking gear, I turned again toward the ravine below the campsite, drawn by the memory of the voices I'd heard in the pre-dawn darkness. Now, fully illuminated, the area looked completely different. I took a few cautious steps closer to the edge of the trail, squinting downward toward the source of the earlier reflection. There, glinting softly in the morning light, were the aluminum drainage pipes protruding from the earth, partially obscured by leaves and dirt. My stomach dropped slightly as the reality sank in. No sleeping bag, no campers. No one had been there at all. I stared blankly, feeling foolish, confusion twisting into dread as the truth settled. If no one had been camping down there, then whose voices had I heard? A sharp crack echoed suddenly behind me. I spun around instantly, heart racing. My partner stood near the outhouse, paused mid-step. His eyes met mine, wide and questioning. "Did you hear?" I started, my voice wavering. He nodded slowly. "Yeah." We both turned simultaneously toward the cedar tree, now a little further away, but clearly visible. Even from this distance, the noise was distinct, louder now. Branches splintering violently, rustling heavy enough to imply something huge and powerful hidden in the branches. Yet the tree remained motionless, unnaturally still despite the intensity of the sounds. The unease I'd felt before surged back, far stronger now. Whatever this was, logic couldn't explain it, and my mind raced through possibilities. A hidden animal, a strange acoustical effect, anything to rationalize the impossibility unfolding in front of us. But nothing fit. There was no wind, no visible movement, just the continuous crashing sounds echoing clearly through the quiet morning. My partner glanced at me uneasily, then nodded toward the outhouse. "Give me a second. We'll leave immediately after, okay?" I nodded numbly, watching him hurry toward the small structure. My chest tightened, anxiety crawling sharply through my veins. Alone again, the cracking noise from the tree seemed to intensify once more, louder and faster, as if responding to his departure. Each splintering snap felt closer now, more forceful. Every muscle in my body tensed, adrenaline pushing me toward panic. Standing there, vulnerable and alone, I could feel the oppressive weight of something unseen, an invisible presence rooted firmly in the inexplicable chaos around me. I stared at the tree, defiant yet terrified, desperate for some rational explanation. But the tree offered none, just its persistent and impossible sounds. "Hey!" I shouted suddenly, desperate to break through the tension. My voice echoed weakly, swallowed by the dense forest. "Leave us alone." My words hung empty, unanswered. The noise paused for only a heartbeat, then resumed louder, almost aggressive. I stepped back instinctively, feeling exposed, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Wild animal attack, sudden ambush, something emerging from the underbrush. The outhouse door swung open suddenly, and my partner stepped quickly out onto the trail, moving toward me with urgency. The moment he appeared clearly beside me, the noise stopped instantly. Silence returned, abrupt and unsettling, as though it had never been disrupted. The forest was quiet, perfectly still. We stared at each other wordlessly, the air heavy with unspoken fear. "You heard it stop, right?" I finally whispered. "Yeah," he answered quietly, "as soon as I came out." A chill crawled up my spine deeper than before. It was undeniable now. This was deliberate, purposeful. We exchanged no more words. We secured our packs, helmets clipped, pedals turned into position, each movement swift but controlled. Neither of us mentioned the ravine again. Neither of us mentioned the tree. But we could feel it there, silent and heavy, watching as we rolled our bikes onto the trail. eager to put distance between ourselves and whatever invisible thing had claimed the cedar tree as its own. We pedaled silently, tires crunching on the packed earth, senses still painfully alert. The oppressive quiet that followed us away from the campsite felt unnatural, a void left by whatever had filled the woods earlier. It was as if the entire forest had frozen, holding its breath. Glancing back, I saw only trees, motionless cedars, heavy pines, empty stretches of dense brush. The previous commotion seemed distant now, almost unreal in the calm of daylight, but the unease lingered sharply beneath my ribs. My partner's face remained set in determined silence, eyes forward, expression tense. We crossed a small wooden bridge spanning Boulder Creek, and something cracked sharply in the distance behind us. A single deliberate sound echoing clearly off the trees. We both braked instinctively, turning back toward the trail we'd just traveled. The trail stretched empty and quiet, trees standing motionless. No branches fell, no animals stirred. Nothing visible justified the sound. Without speaking, we pressed on, pedaling faster now, urgency dictating our pace. My heartbeat hammered in my ears, every rustle of brush and creak of branches amplified by adrenaline. Each curve in the trail filled me with dread, every shadow conjuring brief, irrational fears of ambush. As minutes stretched into an hour, the oppressive tension gradually began to loosen. Sunlight filtered more fully through the treetops, warming patches of moss and earth, lighting our path more confidently. Birdsong slowly returned, hesitant at first, eventually becoming reassuringly familiar. By the time we paused briefly to catch our breath, we'd covered a significant distance. I could no longer sense the strange heaviness in the air that had seemed so suffocating before. My partner removed his helmet, wiping sweat from his brow, breathing heavily. What the hell was that back there? I shook my head, unsure how to answer. I don't know. Animals can't do that, right? He glanced uneasily over his shoulder, eyes scanning the woods behind us. No animal I know. There wasn't any wind either. Trees don't just... He stopped short, unwilling to say aloud what we'd both been thinking. We stood in silence for a moment, the calm of the forest now almost deceptive. In ordinary daylight, surrounded by ordinary sounds, what we'd experienced felt surreal, impossible. But I knew it had been